Well, hello, everybody. Ah, welcome to the live stream. I am so excited that you're joining us, whether you're joining us live. In fact, yes, put in the comments where you're joining us from and why you're so excited to hear Danny and I speak about this topic of active listening and hostage negotiations and law enforcement and conflict situations. Go ahead and put that in the chat. Now, there will be plenty of people who will be joining us as we go, and it will also be people who will look at this after the fact. So if you want to know, can I share this with friends later? The answer is yes. So we'll be able to make sure that we're doing that. Now, my guest today is going to be Danny Langloss, one of my favorite people on the planet. And we're going to be talking about how the 5-step cycle of active listening really applies to unlocking stronger relationships and really high influence in all areas of your life. But we're going to be drilling down into some areas that Danny's particularly experienced in. And that's going to be this idea of conflict, criminal interrogations, hostage negotiations, law enforcement. I think it's so interesting. My goal with all of this is to share with people the impact that active listening has on all areas of our life at work and personally, but focused more on work and all different types of work. I don't want you to think it's just a thing that HR does, just a thing that a manager does. I want you to think about active listening as all of our responsibilities. And I want you to see the positive impacts as through this conversation and your interaction with us in the comments as a way for you to make sure that those in your presence feel heard, valued, and understood. Now, as I was saying earlier, you see in the corner here, there's that Art of Active Listening book right there. And that is this book that comes out April 25th. So I'm going to want you, of course, to pre-order a copy of this. But no further ado, I'm going to invite one of my friends on, Danny Langloss.
Hi, Heather. Good
Hey,
afternoon.
Danny. Hey, I'm so glad to have you here. And I love, by the way, your new logo in the background. It's very, very cool.
Thank you. I'm a big fan as well. I've got a buddy who's in graphic design. He's taking good care of me.
So, okay, we tell everybody kind of a little bit about your background. Like, why are you here? What kind of where this idea of active listening? Where did it start for you? Let's just share that with some of the audience now.
Yeah, so to kind of cut to it in a small synopsis, my career began as a police officer at 21 years old. I worked through the ranks of patrol officer, detective, sergeant. I was the police chief for 10 years. I'm currently the city manager of Dixon. I've been in that position for 5 or 6 years now. But when you look at active listening, that really began to shape my career, my communication ability, my abilities as an interrogator and investigator. But then I was asked to lead the creation of the hostage negotiation team. And so as part of that, I went to the FBI hostage negotiation school. I went to a couple other negotiation schools. And that's where I really learned about and fell in love with active listening. Now, I have to be honest, Heather, a lot of what I did from my experience and training just become natural, second nature to me. And it really wasn't until you spoke at the Midwest Summit of Leadership last year as our featured speaker, and you began walking through your keynote, The Art of Active Listening, that I thought, I need to go take a deeper dive. And so I went back, I opened my huge hostage negotiator book, and I was on my way to the active listening session to freshen up and to look at that and the key components of it. And when I was on my way there, I found something that was just as transformational, and that was the FBI behavioral change stairway that shaped something into what I've created now called the influence stairway. And so that's a little bit about me and my journey, but your inspiration and impact, the stamp you left on me, this revolutionary 5-step process caused me to dig deeper in my leadership and leadership development. I'm a keynote speaker. I do consulting. I go out and help organizations who struggle with culture. And the depth and level for me to be a multiplier was so enhanced by your work.
Oh, thank you so much for that. It's so funny because I think that was might have been one of the earlier times of delivering that talk, and every time you iterate on that. But that what I love about it is that framework is the framework. It does not change, and there's so many insights I gather from the audiences where I'm like, huh, I didn't think about that. That's got to be an edition, second edition. Because there's just things that you're learning as you go, oh yeah, that is, I don't even think I realized I meant that, but guess what? I think I meant that. So it's just cool to gather all those things about. And one of the things like I was saying before I brought you on is I love to, people think of, oh, active listening. Okay, she's a communication speaker or a communication consultant. Oh, active listening. She's on the touchy-feely side. Active listening, maybe is this an HR thing? And so I'm trying to dispel this idea that the the desire and the need to actively listen in the way that I talk about in that framework is only limited to a small group of people. Because in fact, it is all of our responsibilities, whether we want to believe it or not, that we all have this innate need to be heard. And so that then it's upon us to really make sure that those in our presence feel like they're heard, like they're valued, like they're understood. So that's me codifying this in a way that says step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the whys behind it. We're really in this shiny book, by the way. I just love this. And I wish I could say I came up with this cover, but I
It
didn't.
is. It
Actually,
is beautiful. It is
everybody else came up.
beautiful.
You all who are out
Well,
there came up with the cover. So, but it's just like it's not exciting, and I love the fact like your side of things. I worked. Somebody referred me, actually, Amy Blaschke referred me to law enforcement, and I did the
mhm.
talk. This was on a different kind of topic, but I remember talking to them and the different things that they would talk about listening to media, listening to their community, and this is in California, so it already had kind of heated different levels that were going on as it relates to race relations and stuff. So I would be interested to know from you, how do you think that 5-part framework, the 5 steps to psychoactive listening, fit into what you were kind of reading and going deeper on your hostage negotiations, the ladder or whatever that you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, so I wanna say something really quick. Active listening, empathy, rapport building, human connection isn't soft on leadership, it is leadership, right? Leadership is about people. When you look at the people who are trained as hostage negotiators, these detectives, these criminal interrogators that go in and sit across from murderers and child abusers and violent criminals, the secret sauce to moving somebody from a hostage taker to a hostage releaser to somebody who's shooting out the window at the police to putting their gun down and coming out peacefully is active listening. The behavioral change model in the FBI, the first step, so you got your negative behavior, your hostage taker, your violent criminal in a house held up, right? Empathy is the ability to see through the eyes of another person, to feel through their heart, to really connect. And when you combine that with active listening as you're establishing common ground and building rapport and gaining this influence, what happens is we actually get a roadmap on how to take somebody from where they are to where they want to be. Okay, Danny, that's great. That's a hostage situation. How does that relate to leadership? Well, it relates perfectly to leadership because as leaders, as we need to connect with people, right? Leadership isn't about power and control. People choose to follow us. They choose to join our cause. They choose to collaborate and be part of a team. Well, when we start with empathy, right? And not feeling sorry for somebody, that's sympathy, but truly understanding a person, their perspective, what connects them to the organization, what drives their passions, what really lights their fire, what motivates them. And we use active listening, it gives us a roadmap on how to deeper connect our people to the organization, to what's important to them, to their values. Then we can align those things with them. And then we can help them not only reach their full potential, but now we can help them accomplish the goals and create the success they want in their career. And to me, that's the power of the framework. That's the power of active listening. And if anybody wants to argue about whether or not that's soft, I mean, I don't even know how you could.
I'm gonna go ahead and put. Thank you, Danny, for that. That was amazing. I'm gonna put Scotty on the screen too, with just like and it's especially challenging when the person you are trying to listen to is actively blaming you for their situation. And I can see this happening. And so when we think about kind of leadership, leadership isn't just the title. It's also like people looking to you for guidance in some way in certain situations. It's situational. It's whatever it might be. And so, Scotty, I really like this idea, or Scott, I like this idea of when we think about we show up as leaders and we really elevate ourselves when we can show up in a place when people aren't happy with us. And how do we listen then? Are we able to dial into what it is that they need from us in the moment and put our own feelings and offensive, all the, being defensive, all those things, putting all that aside and instead leaning into what their actual need is? It's so hard to be like, get all fluffed up. Because especially if the person is super rough on communications, we get all fluffed up and we fully stop leaning into what they're saying. And when we do that, we can't reach that resolution that Danny's kind of talking about too. There's this like resolution point, and we can't get there if all we're thinking about is winning. We're there to win. We're there to get something from the person. And so I always talk about, as we think about seeking, and seeking is step 2 of my 5-part framework. If we think about it from the give versus get, this when we think about seeking, though, seeking is something that like you want it badly. When you seek something, if you think about what you're seeking, we go, I want to be like, I want to be thinner. I want to have more money. All those things. We're like seeking these things. But in this listening space, we're seeking the truth. We're seeking deeper understanding. And so if we want it badly, we're not there to get. And so if we go there to get, we're not going to be able to get to the resolution with the person who is not actually happy with us, or they're blaming us, or it's a bad customer experience, whatever it might be. We're not going to get to the bottom of that. So thanks, Danny, for kind of giving us that, and Scott for kind of putting that out there.
Yeah, I'd love to give a shout out to Scott. We're good friends, have been connected on LinkedIn for a while. I'm at a disadvantage. I can't see from where we're at who's on and what the comments are, but we really appreciate everybody joining us. This is so exciting.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And then there's Valerie. He's out there too. Valerie, both of you and I met her at the No
Oh
Longer
yeah.
Virtual conference. Such a good way to describe the reaction. And it is so funny, though, isn't it, Valerie and everybody else who's listening out there, where we all get there. So I'm saying fluffed up because I've been there too. And there's just only there's like certain people in my life, mostly in the personal side, that just can get me in that. It gets underneath my skin, and I feel myself fluff up.
Well, think about it, Heather. So you think about this situation, you're in a conversation with somebody, maybe one of your team members, and they're upset and they're venting and they're upset with you. I mean, to give you an idea how powerful active listening is, I mean, we're showing up in the policing world in these hostage situations, or somebody is threatening suicide and they're armed. I mean, take that example and multiply it times 100 from where they're at. And how
Mhm.
you diffuse that isn't by getting defensive, isn't by trying to win, right? You seek, as you said, to understand their perspective. You want to get their perspective. And you do that through active listening. You do that through emotional labeling. You do it through paraphrasing. When people feel heard, they feel significant. When we feel significant, it releases serotonin in our brain. To think about how powerful that chemical is, it's the sunshine chemical, right? Like, and lately in the Midwest, we've been getting a lot of it. People are feeling good. But when we feel significant, we feel good. So that significant chemical battles the adrenaline from the conflict, right? It battles
Mhm.
that adrenaline from the conflict. And then we actively listen and we can establish some common ground, right? That releases oxytocin in the brain, which is the bonding chemical, the trust chemical. So just by listening, we're releasing two very powerful, chemicals in a person's brain, and we're diminishing that adrenaline, the stress of hormones of the cortisol, right, and the adrenaline. And so
Mhm.
all this stuff we're talking about is founded and rooted in science. These emotions that we feel are driving the chemical release in our brain. So we begin to change those emotions through active listening, and through your powerful 5-step process, we actually change the chemicals in the brain. And that's how nobody thought it was possible to get this hostage taker where they're at to come out. They're talking about going in with the SWAT team, which is just going to end disastrous. Nobody thought it was possible that this conversation that started with our team member where they're upset at us could go a positive way. And they leave with a hug and a thank you and end up apologizing for kind of how they came at us. And that's the power of active listening.
And Ashley asks, I'm going to put this on the screen too, so you can see it too, Danny. Can you elaborate on the give versus get? Why is it important for leaders to have this mindset? And so what I always tell people is that when we think about this idea of leaning in, so as we go into this idea of seeking to understand, and we're leaning in to get to the truth, if our main mindset is what can I get from this person, the other person is going to sniff it out in 1 second, and it will be lack of trust that'll be involved. People are going to be less willing to do things for you. They're not going to tell you as much of their truth because they know you're always out for something. So if you're there and they know you're really present and you really want to know what they're going through, what's happening, now they're going to be more willing to share with you. They're going to be willing to do more for you in the organization because they trust you. So I think those are some of the benefits if we go into it from a giving, a service mentality versus going into it from what am I getting from you? Now, I always tell people I'm a businesswoman. I have to get things. People know I want things too, and you have to. But if they know from the get go that I care for them deeply, when I go into it, they also know that I'm curious about, I'm there to serve them. So I really do want to know what's happening with them first. Secondarily, I might need to get something from them. So I just want to be clear on that. I'm not some like Pollyanna naive person that thinks we don't need to get anything. We do need to get things. But if we go into that at the first mindset of get, people will sniff it out and we'll lose trust right away.
Well, when
Um,
you pour into your people and when you pour into your customer, they in turn will reciprocate. There's a mirroring factor that happens in a behavior and a mindset, right? And
Mhm.
so it's not what comes first, the chicken or the egg. No, the chicken comes first, it lays the egg. We give first,
Yeah.
and then at the end, whatever we're seeking, whether it be collaboration or loyalty or dedication or ownership, right? Whether it be innovation, whether it be, more positive energy from a person, whatever it is, whether it be, landing a client, when you give and you pour into, you end up getting what it is you need. But you can't go into it thinking this is what I need. You go into it in a pure sense to be there and share a space with the person, to be present, to be curious, and then to let it will naturally flow with the active listening skills, and the other person will give you that roadmap and that pathway to get to incredible win-wins.
I remember, I was doing a talk with it was an iconic type of organization, and I remember we were having them do this exercise where they were seeking inside the audience, they were reflecting. I think you might remember this. I may have done this with your group, Danny. I can't remember, but they paired up and they kind of told each other stories. And as I had them share what that experience was like, just between the two of those people who may or may not have known each other or known anything about that story in advance, it was just it was just such power in it. Like they'd said, like, number one, thank you so much for giving me this space to get to know my coworker that I didn't ordinarily have. And then also the power that I saw, I felt like powerful as I listened, and I also felt powerful and vulnerable as other people listened to me. And again, that herd sense. So it is, as you talked about, Danny, that idea of the neuroscience and the emotions and the chemicals that it's releasing. It's a powerful thing to witness, just like being somebody looking down from the stage, watching it go take place, hearing the people talk. I feel super gifted to see kind of those interactions happen as well. So, uh,
100%.
let's see, Ashley asking, what does a lack of active listening look like inside of workplace? Oh gosh. Well, I think in that case, if we don't have active listening, then people are walking around not feeling heard. They're feeling like a number. They're feeling devalued. They're not feeling like they don't feel like they're bought in or have any buy-in or have any ownership in anything that's happening at work. They feel like a victim, like things are happening to them, not with them. And when you think about that, it'd be the same thing with customers. It'd be the same thing with partners and vendors and really any workplace relationship where you have to have the interaction points. And I was at a group speaking the other day to a group of procurement professionals, and one of the vendors was like, yeah, you feel like you're in a powerless place. And then the one of the procurement people said, yeah, now I know, like, I need to give a little bit more space and a little bit more power over to the people who often are feeling powerless with me, because I make the decision whether to purchase from them or not. So these are just the things to be thinking about in any role that we're in. I feel like we can all own it. And I know you love this idea of ownership, Danny. So if you want to spin off on that.
I do, but when you look at what active listening doesn't look like, as human beings, we are just kind of wired. The first 10 words that come out of the other person's mouth, you're making assumptions or predicting what they're going to say. You're judging, right? You're thinking about how you're going to respond. And so actually after about 10 seconds, you stop listening, and most of the time can't even really surmise what the other person was saying because you're just waiting for your turn to talk. And when that happens and somebody doesn't feel listened to and they feel like you have an agenda, it destroys trust,
Mhm.
right? It makes people feel like they're not significant. They don't matter. It makes people feel inferior. And
Mhm.
that's the problem, because then that starts driving those negative neurotransmitters, those neurochemicals of cortisol. And then if conflict comes about, adrenaline. And so that's when we don't active listen, what happens? People don't feel seen. They don't feel heard. They don't feel valued. They don't feel like they belong. They don't have significance. They don't feel appreciated. All those things that are core to that we need as human beings.
That's so true. And I'm gonna quickly walk through the 5-step framework so that people can understand when we say active listening, what we exactly mean, because they may be thinking of what it meant before, and now I want them to know what it is now. But before I do that, really quickly, I'm gonna have Martha's question on the screen. Martha asked you, Danny, have you had experiences when active listening didn't work for you, when you had to use another or an additional strategy to de-escalate or shift the situation?
Well, there are times as a hostage negotiator that will position the SWAT team in a little different area to, like, no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So, at the end of the day, I think the important thing is when you come into a conversation, especially where there might be disagreement or conflict or somebody's unhappy, we can't expect to resolve that maybe in one conversation or one setting. And we might need to take a pause or a timeout. And so when I think about active listening, um, I think it's the go-to. We continue to lean into it. But then something else Heather had turned me to a few years ago when we first met was this power and this idea of the reframe. So when you throw out some ideas about what else could it be, right? When you can take a situation that could be seen as negative and turn it to positive, and then when you can ask powerful questions. So I think, active listening, you're going to ask, you're going to do some minimal encouragers, but I think when you combine that with powerful questions, like, tell me more about that. Help me understand why you feel this way. Help me understand, what I'm doing that's causing you to feel a negative emotion or causing you to feel X, Y, and Z. When we really see, and we really want to know from curiosity, not to get a chip or something. I think active listening combined with powerful questions and then going back to active listening and maybe trying to put out a reframe or a what else could it be type situation will help move the needle. But it's okay for a conversation or a situation to end in a regular business situation, knowing there's more work to be done. Because at the end of the day, there doesn't have to be agreement. It's just the fact the person felt valued and heard and respected by you that's going to begin to move the needle, because some people just need more time to reflect. Does that make sense, Heather?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And that's a perfect segue, I think, right, to that 5-part framework when we think about some of the things that people don't think of when they think of listening. And most of us think of listening as us leaning in, maybe, or like having a conversation and rephrasing or parroting back what someone just said. And wow, voila, we think we've just listened. So here's the framework. The first one is to recognize the unsaid. The first step is to recognize the unsaid. And recognize the unsaid really is this idea of looking at our environment, noticing the unspoken cues, the unspoken words, the things that we're seeing in the environment across from people in an organization, in a team, in a meeting. What is not being said, and what is the danger in not knowing that, and what are we missing by not pausing and paying attention to what isn't there? Because if we don't know what's not said, we can't really move on to true listening. We got to get to the point where safety is inserted so that people can actually lean in to tell us their truth. And that's that next step, is seeking to understand, which is what most people think of when they think of listening or active listening. They say, okay, I am seeking. I sat across from the person. I paraphrased what they said. I ended the conversation to make sure I understood what they needed. And voila, I've listened. It is a key component to active listening, or to the cycle of active listening, as I call it. But it is not the only thing, because after we've listened, it's this thing that Danny just talked about, which is I call decoding. And that decoding is that reflection, that pause phase where we take in what it is we hear from someone, and now we have to reflect on what it is. We have to process what we're going to do next about it. Are we going to go include the leadership team? Are we going to other people in our organization? Do we need to talk to more customers? What are those things we need to do to make sure that we don't just jump to action? Because most of us, put a thumbs up in the comment. Are you somebody who actually has an affinity to action? Because I know I do. Like, this is my
Mm-hmm.
shortcoming right here. I hear feedback, boom, act. Feedback, act. But what we do by not choosing to pause, decode, and reflect is we give away our power, and we also take away the power of the other. Because think about how magnetic it is when you pause after you hear something, and then you come back, you get permission to come back in a day or two after you've done your research. The person's like, wow, they take this super seriously. Like,
Yeah.
they're not just brushing my concern underneath the carpet. They're actually going to do some investigation. So
Yes.
it gives them power. It makes you and the organization more magnetic by pausing. And then after you've done that, now you can move on to action. And the action doesn't have to be acting on everything, but that action needs to be informed by the previous steps. And you need to know when enough action is enough, when you don't need to act, and some of those things that of course, I talk about in the book. But action is something you do. It's kind of the connection between someone's voice and the result they see from their voice. And so that's what the action does. It just shows the power connection between the two. And then that final step is what I call closing the loop. And that is where most of us fall down. Most of us, we just fall down here. So somebody requests something from us. Somebody gives us some feedback. We've done a good job. We've done all the things I've said up to this point. We've even reflected with people. And actually, we decided to act, and we act on their behalf. And then we stop right there. And what the closing the loop says is, don't stop right there. After you act or before you're about to act, you have a plan of action, go back to the person or the people who gave you the feedback. Let them know what you did about it, what you intend to do about it, even get more feedback before you go do the action. So it's like this tennis match, this back and forth thing. And at the
Mhm.
end, they're like, now I see a change that took place. And I have no doubt that that change was because of my voice. Can you see how powerful that would be to have that kind of cycle in action? So that's what that cycle, that's what the framework is. That's what the new active listening cycle is.
Well, and Heather, when you talk about that cycle, right, it drives psychological safety, belonging. People understand that they matter, empowerment, it enables. And when people feel like their ideas and their voice matters, they start stepping up and speaking and using it more. I mean, that's why we have everybody on the team, right? We need that. If we just needed us, we wouldn't need the team. And so creating this environment where you 10x your ability because you have all these amazing people around you. But if we're not active listening, if people don't feel seen or they don't feel they have a voice, if we're not taking this information in, if they don't know that they're going to be taken seriously, you're going to act on it, all those ideas, all that input, all that problem solving is just going to go away. And then you're left alone on an island. And so, because that's how you really transition to this concept of ownership that you mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
this extreme emotional and psychological commitment to the team, to the values, to the goals, to the organization as a whole. And that's really what we want with our people. It's the X factor of high performing teams and cultures is for people to have ownership, but they got to have a voice. They got to feel like somebody cares about what they have to say. They got to feel like if they step up to solve a problem, it's not a waste of their time and energy. And so when you talk about the decoding and taking action and closing the loop, I think that closing the loop says, you know what? Man, we respected and we trusted you and we valued you. And man, you are sharp. And look at what's happened because of your idea. You made us better. You made us better. And I just think the 5-step process is gold. And I like how it makes it easier and more actionable. And it doesn't require, 4 hours of training a month and hostage negotiation and simulations. This is something you can take and put into action immediately with your team.
I love that. And Bruce says, I have a bias to action.
Mhm.
Act now and ask for forgiveness later, right? And I totally get that. Just keeping in mind that our desire to run to act works against us and them because we don't do what Danny just said. We don't show them our true respect and how much we value them if we just rush right to action. You may think it does. You're coming from a place of heart, which is great. You're coming from a good place,
Yeah.
but we got to pause. We got to slow down. We got to reflect. Okay, and then here's Ashley. Ashley says, "How can leaders implement this cycle or framework at work when they're busy? What are some tips?" And boy, I totally get that. One thing I would say is I go through this cycle, and there are times I remember I was going through there was a merger and there were some layoffs happening, and there were people that were coming to me, and I was not in HR. I was leading customer experience, but people were just kind of coming to me with concerns about what was happening. And I created an employee engagement council, circling people around the table. Let's talk about how we can make this merger a success. What's going on? And I would hear all their feedback, and I was decoding right on the spot. So it was happening in quick order, and then I was trying to help them kind of problem solve through it. I really wasn't having time to go and like take a day or two. And so I would say that this cycle can go pretty quickly. It's just that you have to give yourself the space, even if it's just a couple minutes, even if there's a reflection time. You can decode more quickly on the spot. If your cell phone is put away and your laptop is put down and you've minimized the distractions, then you can decode right on the spot. If it's a very crazy kind of meeting, you're going to have to exit, come back, even if it's just an hour. It doesn't have to be like a long, long period. So I would say the key is to say, you kind of asked this earlier, Ashley, this whole mindset. It is the mindset first that we have to start with. We have to enter into this right mindset of being of service to others, of giving to others, so that if they come to us and let's say we're like super busy and they want to, you can tell they need us in the moment. You don't have to address it right in that moment. You can be like, oh my gosh, I'm a little frazzled right now. I'm going to be honest. Can I circle back with you around 2 o'clock today? And then I want to make sure I can be present with you and I can talk to you then. Okay, so that's someone who's busy, showing respect to the other person, not trying to handle the feedback as it's happening when there's too many things going on. And believe me, I know I've been there too, where it's like, oh shoot, I'm addressing too many things at one time. I'm frazzled. There's no way I'm going to be able to give them a good, solid response if I don't just kind of settle myself down, move over there, come back to like re-enter myself into the situation. So you just have to be super aware of how you're feeling, what's going on in the environment, and do you feel like you can handle this cycle, this kind of process there, or can you come back to it a little bit later so that you can give them presence and kind of walk through it in a quick step way.
Heather, if I could add, Bill, because that was brilliantly said. I love the way you walk through that. But I think that when we invest in that time in those conversations that matter, and we use active listening and empathy and kind of get down in the hole with people and truly see through their eyes, feel through their heart, that investment of time saves us so much time in the long run. Because now we have this highly engaged person who feels like they belong, who feels like they matter, who knows what purpose they're working toward, why what they do matters. They feel empowered, and now they can go out and act. And now they're not coming in wanting us to solve every single situation or problem for them, which takes time and time and time and time. So I actually, and believe me, I have no bandwidth. My day is booked whistle to whistle, from content creation to speaking creation to my job as city manager. But during those times, I know that it's the investment. And so when I make that investment, I'm actually getting time back. And what I end up doing is resolving and preventing tons of conflict and tons of problem in the organization, to where, honestly, if I'm gone for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, the organization can run, the culture can be sustained, because they're not doing it for me. They're doing it for them. It's what they believe in. But we've got to invest that time up front, even though I know it takes a lot of time.
Yeah, I love that.
So
And oh, go ahead, Danny.
no, I was just going to say really quick, we're about a half hour in. So our team, I just want to tell people, as I come on, and Heather asked me to come on, I just love Heather. She's a mentor to me. She's a coach to me. She's had such an impact on the work that I do. Last year we brought her in as our keynote, got everybody the art of caring leadership. And I recently got the art of active listening pre-ordered for our entire leadership team. But I've got to go on and order another book, because last night I did a keynote for a local bank, 130 of their team members. It was communication excellence, the cornerstone of championship teams. Talked about this emotional stamp, like this imprint we leave on people. So much is driven by the influence stairway, driven by active listening. And so I was telling Dirk Meminger, the CEO of Sauk Valley Bank, about your book, about the fact it was coming out. And so I promised him that I would get him a copy of your book. So like right now, if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead, get that book ordered. And I challenge everybody that's on right now, just go into your browser. I'm looking here. The paperback's $21.95. The simple investment, so cheap. And we got our 10 going. We're going to be working through a book club with all of our executive leadership team. But I'm excited that Dirk, he's like, hey, what other resources? I'm like, Heather is world renowned in this space. I can't wait for our book to get here. So if you don't mind, Heather, I'm just going to order that right now for him. I just encourage other people to do the same. I'm just on Amazon, type in the art of active listening. Got all my stuff up here, got my account up here, and it's that quick. If you use Amazon, like, boom, book's on the way.
I
Right?
appreciate you too, and being a part of the
Well,
book launch team too, Danny. I appreciate you doing that and all the support on the book.
Well, yeah, but it's just a call to action for people, because people are on, they see and they understand the value, and they're hearing that in the conversation. Estimated arrival says Thursday, May 4th. Can't wait for that thing to come out and dive into it. But really, it's about that bias to action, and for the message last night to be received the way it was through that keynote, through drawing a lot on stuff that I've evolved because of you and understanding your framework. It's just so powerful and will change so many things. So really appreciate it, because this is a lot of work, Heather. This is a lot you're investing in other people.
Well, I appreciate it, and I'm called to do the work, so it doesn't feel like it's work, right? I'm called to do it, so it's help. It fills me up a lot. Let's put it that way. So thanks for that. Now, Scott, I want to go back to you. You talked about customer experience feeds directly back into employee experience for that reason, and it is absolutely true. This whole cycle works in all the context. And when I very first started my company, it was called Customer Fanatics, and the tagline was engaged employees, delighted customers, fanatical results. And a couple years ago, I changed the name to Employee Fanatics because I was focusing mostly internal. But it's so funny with this book on the art of active listening, I'm now full circle again, back to kind of customer, employee, all the people at work, how we listen to each other. So there is a chain here, isn't there? There's a chain reaction that takes place, a positive one, if we do lean in and commit to seeing through to people, to giving them that space, that safe space, creating a space for them to tell us their truth. You know what they say about the truth, that it'll set you free. And I am telling you, without sounding super religious in here, it does do that. Because if you go to solve for the wrong thing, you're not getting to the truth. You're making assumptions. It's going to end up hurting you or them. But if you go in and you understand the truth and you solve for the thing that's in front of you, whether it's painful to hear, whether it's hard to take in, whether it's going to be hard to overcome. Well, now again, I feel like you're in the game. But before that, you can't own it. You don't know what it is. And so you're kind of solving for something that's all assumed. So that's what I absolutely love about this. And again, I appreciate all of your support as it relates to this too, Danny.
Well, and Heather, when I hear you say that, I hear, and I think it falls in there, the recognize the unsaid. It's not to just listen to the words, it's to listen to the meaning of the words, right? Because how many times have you talked to your spouse or a friend, or somebody you know, a coworker that comes in and says, I'm sick of this place. I've had it with this place. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to go in and give, the city manager an earful, and I'm quitting, and I'm blah, blah, blah. And they're going on and they leave, right? And they never say they're not going to quit or do this. And you give them a call the next day and you're like, hey, how'd that conversation go with the city manager? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, you said you were going to. No, what they were saying was, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm upset, I feel devalued, right? And so part of this framework and active listening is you recognize the unsaid. They're saying certain words, but what's their tone? What's their emotion? What's their body language? What are the other things what do they really mean? And that's part of the decoding, right? Like, what do you really mean? Because if we go solving this and worried they're going to go into the city manager's office and quit, no, they're not. They need empathy. They need compassion. They just need somebody to talk to and vent to get through this emotion, to get to the other side. And I think that's a simple but easy example to show some of the power of this.
I love that. As I'm thinking through, I know we're going to wind down here in a little bit, so I'll ask you kind of a final question then. But as I was thinking through just like my evolution to get where I'm at today. And boy, it's like I have to say, like I am on such a journey, and then it just it never ends. I'm like 4 kids in, and this business and these things and all these topics. It can get kind of exhausting. But like I said earlier, I feel really called to do this work, and it started for me like way young, not feeling like I had a voice in kind of an interracial, interfaith family, and feeling like an outsider, feeling like I didn't belong, and really deciding at that point that I wanted to create a place where everyone had that voice, where everyone felt like they were understood, and that they were actual human. They were people. They were important. They were valued, that I wanted them to know me. And so every kind of all my journey through my life and every role I've had, whether I'm talking to customers or team members, whatever it is, I've always had this, real true desire to make people feel important in my presence, to feel valued. Do I get it all the time? 100. No, I am not 100% on this. I don't even like the word expert because I know that I lean into these things and I'm better at these things than most, but I fall short, and that's okay. And what I would say for those who are listening is it's not about perfection on this journey. It's about an awareness of where you're at, kind of starting from where I'm at now, realizing what I can do tomorrow, not what you slap yourself from what you did yesterday, and to say, how can I be better tomorrow for those in my presence who look to me for guidance, for uplifting, for them for me to see them. What can I do? How can I show up in a more intentional way to do that? And so it's just been my kind of my life's work to continue along this journey, to continue to laser in on, wow, how can that person, when they leave me, they feel like I'm really vested in them, like I really do care about them. And I don't really care their position. I don't care if it's the person at the grocery store. Like I hate being on the phone when I go through line, because it means the person feels like they are just a thing or a cog to help me get along their way. And so the listening part is also like presence without words. And I'm going to be here. I'm not going to be on the phone. I'm going to be here. I'm not going to be on my laptop. Am I 100% of that? No, I have a scorecard for myself. I know when I've done well or not. And I think as leaders, we have to do that. Keep your own personal scorecard. Whether you have a title or not, you're a leader, believe it or not, and keep your own personal scorecard to be thinking about, how well did I do today in this interaction with this person? And that's okay if it wasn't great. You have an opportunity to go back and do better. So, Danny, I'd love for you to just kind of wrap up for everybody here what you think as you think about the impact of active listening. Do you think about just like this evolving? You're in county management, you've been in law enforcement, just the different areas you've been in. What you think the impact could be, and also maybe where you think some of the gaps are, and then maybe what your personal commitment is to just try to lean more into this cycle and this more light way of listening.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. And I do want to thank everybody for coming on and joining, everybody from the Leadership Excellence community, everybody from Heather's community to come and join us today and take that time. I think active listening, the influence stairway I've talked about, some of the discoveries I've made because of your work are what create the unstoppable leader. Because at the core of everything, leadership is about relationships. Relationships are founded in trust. You can't have trust without establishing rapport. And empathy is the great human connector. And this active listening skill that we use goes across to everything. For us, creating strategic partnerships with Dixon Chamber of Commerce, Dixon Main Street, right? The county, the school district, the park district, developers. Active listening is so powerful in negotiation. I don't do hostage negotiation anymore, but we're just finished a negotiation with 4 unions. We just finished negotiations on 4 major economic development deals. They're going to land new hotels and riverfront development, restaurants, all these things. Day-to-day issues, conflict, people feeling upset, feeling slighted. We fail to communicate at times, even though we try. The ability to sit in a space with somebody and use active listening to understand what their challenges are, what they're facing, what they need to feel fulfilled, to enjoy work, to have high morale, to be engaged. Active listening is something that touches every single part of our life. When I come home with my wife and her, right? Like, active listening is just so important. And when I think about the impact it has, I didn't realize this, right? I believe great leaders are great multipliers. And I'm at a stage now where I'm really focused on multiplying, succession planning. I'm going into companies and organizations that have problems that are toxic. What skill do we use to help diagnose the problems? Listening, one-on-one listening sessions, active listening, all the answers are there. And so as I became a multiplier and I started writing and speaking and doing stuff with our teams, it made me say, okay, what is it that's led to the success in my career? It's relationships. It's my brand, the trust I've created, the influence. Okay, well, how did I get that? Well, it started with empathy. It started by caring about other people's perspectives, ideas, opinions, understanding what's important to them. Then it was establishing common ground, building rapport on things that we're both passionate about, things that drive meaning in our lives. That could be family, that could be work related, that could be a hobby, right? That could be something we want to see for the transformation of Dixon. That consistently over time transitioned to trust. I think rapport is the trust, like infatuation is the love. Like, you never really know that moment you fell in love, but you did fall in love. And there's no way earning a relationship that it's love. It's definitely infatuation. It's the same with rapport and trust. That trust over time builds those strong relationships. And that's what builds the influence. That's what allows us to unite people around this common purpose, common strategy, and to really tap in and for them to feel safe enough to bring their whole self, to bring their ideas, to bring their genius, to bring their greatness to the organization. And when you do that with everybody in your organization, that's what I really call the synergy of champions. If you got 10 great people coming together like that, you don't 10x, you 1,000 times X the impact. And so when I think now, knowing and looking back and digging and reflecting and decoding everything, right? Like, it has been at the core of all of my success. And I'll give you this one quick example. Early in my career, I was out on patrol for the first 2-3 years, and DUI arrests were a big thing within the PD. And every time I arrested for somebody DUI, they would fight, they'd give me a hard time. It was a problem. And all of a sudden I noticed for like 2-3 months, 4 months, that wasn't happening. People were cooperating. People were a lot more compliant. And I said to one of my training officers, I said to him, man, you know what? It's crazy. People have changed. And he said, what do you mean, Danny? I'm like, well, they used to be this way and now they're that way. And he laughed at me. He said, silly boy, people haven't changed. You changed. You learned how to listen. You learned how to put yourself in their shoes. You learned how to connect with them. And because of it, people are no longer fighting you and cussing at you and creating a problem. They're embracing you and cooperating, even though they're in a situation that isn't to their advantage. And they're actually respecting and appreciating the way you do your job. And that's just transformational.
Oh, this is great. I love that, and just the growth that I've seen in you and the growth over these times, and all of us have grown. I mean, I think that's the good thing is if we don't see growth, we're like dying, right? So we need to be growing, we need to be stretching, and that's what this art of active listening really does. And the framework stretches us. It makes us think more deeply about our role to make people feel heard, valued, and understood at work. So for Martha and Mark and whomever else is showing up here, and Ashley and Adonia and Scott and Bruce and whoever, Valerie and Will, all the people that are here who will actually tune into this later because this will be a recording on LinkedIn and on my YouTube channel. I want to thank you for chiming in and just showing a commitment to learn to be better, because that's really what it's all about. And if we can better for ourselves, we can be better for others. We can seek to serve through our listening. Then we're giving a gift to the world that we had no clue we were giving. Listening, active listening, really is the doorway to get to understand not what we think people want, but what they actually want. And when we know that, we can solve for the right things, not for some accidental things. So, Danny, thank you so much for joining. I knew this was going to be great. And thanks to everybody else who joined in. You can share it far and wide as soon as you'll see it recording here pop up. So,
Thank you,
thank you
Heather.
all.
Just really quick, Heather, like the 5 steps are the 5 steps, but you need the deeper dive into how to put these things to action. I just want to give one more call to action because I believe in you. I believe in your work. It's coming into our team. It's going to Sauk Valley Bank. Buy the book. When you log off, if you haven't bought it, make that investment in yourself. Get it. It'll be here soon. So excited to be part of this journey, Heather. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate you. Have a great week. See you soon.